Hi, Kevin.
Hey, how are you?
We're live
Here.
with you and students and everybody.
Hi, everyone I can't see.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome, class of 2020 graduates. Congratulations
Congrats.
on graduating in this crazy year. It's still awesome, and you have a bigger opportunity than ever to make your mark. There's a lot of need right now. So I want to officially welcome our guest today. We are very lucky. We have Chef Kevin Gilespie with us. He is an acclaimed chef. He is the ultimate restaurateur. He's got like a million restaurants in Atlanta. They're all delicious. He's been on Top Chef twice. I rooted for you every time.
Currently still on Top Chef, so you
still
can
on Top Chef.
Watch the grind keep going on.
Absolutely. Fan favorite. What else? James Beard Award Finalist. Like, I can just go on and on. And by the way, cookbook author. I have this, Fire in My Belly. And then there's also a book, Pure Pork Awesomeness.
Yes.
I don't have that one yet, but I'm very excited to get it.
Actually, we just found out that Pure Pork Awesomeness is that literally there are no more of them. So we're about to have to go into reprint. So if you can find one right now, snag it because you'll have the last of the first edition. So that's
excellent.
Good.
I will do that today. Available on Amazon, right?
Maybe. It's literally, we're down to like the dregs. There might not be very many left.
Okay. All right. Well, eventually it'll be available there. If it's out right now, you can still order it and you'll get your copy when it's available. Okay. Enough about that. So we are going to kick things off. I'm going to ask some questions and then we're going to open it up to students for your questions. And I know you guys have lots of them for Kevin, so I will try to stay out of the way. Okay. So I'm going to kick things off. I was doing some research for today and reading up all about you and saw that you initially wanted to be a nuclear engineer.
Yeah.
You got into a super elite school. What happened?
Oh God. Well, I am what happened. It's funny. I did think I wanted to be an engineer for most of my, I guess you'd say like early childhood. My dad does that for a living. I just kind of assumed that would be a nice fit for me. And so I think maybe more than anything, I just set a goal to try to get into the most prestigious school possible without really thinking it would actually happen. Right. And lo and behold, when I got the acceptance letter to MIT, I was definitely excited, but I was also caught off guard. And one of the steps to actually going to MIT is that you physically have to go there and spend a month with a student to make sure that you kind of can, that you understand what you're getting yourself into. And I did that, and I left that month thinking of two things that I was 100% certain on. One was that I was going to be the stupidest person at MIT. And two, that I would also be the coolest person at MIT. And I wasn't really prepared for either of those eventualities. So I said, you know what, maybe I'll do that thing that I really secretly have wanted to do for pretty much my whole life, which was be a chef. I was just kind of, frankly, too embarrassed to tell everyone because you have to remember, like at that time, like in the late 90s, that like nobody was chef wasn't exactly a career that people went into in lieu of like a traditional sort of college background. It was definitely an industry, and there were people who had been very successful at it, but it wasn't taken as seriously as it is today. And so I was just worried that societally people would think that I was kind of walking away from my education. But I knew I wanted to give it a shot, and I knew that I had enough willpower personally that if I chose to go down that path that I would try to do it at the highest level. And so really genuinely at the last minute, only a couple of weeks before school was over, I told my parents, I don't think I'm going to go to MIT, or at least not right now. I'm going to try this cooking thing for a little while. And
what did they say? My parents might have freaked out if I said that.
Well, so my dad is a man of few words, and I'll share what he said in a moment. But my mom actually was incredibly supportive. My mom said to me that she was happy that I had recognized what I was meant to do with my life before I had wasted a great deal of it doing something else.
Okay.
So I was very supportive. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad had a bit more of a longer explanation, but it actually, it's a good story and it factors into kind of how I came about having Gun Show. But maybe
Gun Show being your first restaurant.
Well, being my first alone, I
first
had
alone restaurant. Yes, Woodfire Grill was the first.
Yeah, Woodfire I had in partnership with a couple other gentlemen. Gun Show was the one that was the breakaway. Let's go try to reinvent the world to a certain degree.
It opened like several years ago. You still can't get a table.
Yeah, well, right now you can't get in mostly because it's not open.
Right,
but
you
otherwise,
can't get in anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody feels the same.
Yeah, I don't feel as elitist anymore because you also can't get into any number of other restaurants right now. But anyhow, so yeah, that's it. The path to chef was not a direct route for me. It was a passion of mine, but it was something that I wasn't sure whether or not it really legitimately was a career. And I just kind of took a chance. I just trusted my gut and went with it. And more than anything, on top of trusting my instincts, it was a commitment that I made that if I was going to do it, I wasn't going to sort of step one toe into the pool. I was going to dive in.
So you're saying that, in your opinion, the creative industry has become more widely accepted as a profession?
Yes, I think we're considered now working professionals. Before, everybody, frankly, for years, if you worked in a restaurant, it didn't matter if you owned a restaurant. People acted like it was your side gig that you were doing like temporarily. It was like, oh, you're working in a restaurant. Like, what is it that you're going to school for? And you're like, nothing, just working. And that's changed. I think people are more accepting of the fact that to be a chef, for example, takes a tremendous amount of creative skill, but it also takes a lot of business acumen. It's a very real job and it's a very challenging job. And a lot of chefs have a tremendous amount of actual formal education. But I think in creative pursuits in general, people are starting to recognize that that you wanting to work in a field that was non-traditional 20 years ago isn't a big deal anymore. That's just the way our world is moving. And great, because we need more creativity. We need more abstract thought, especially to get us through times like right now. It's not going to be, no one is going to succeed post-COVID by doing exactly what they were doing before. We need people who are ready to think of what the next answer is.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with this new movement of people wanting to become entrepreneurs. Well, you don't become an entrepreneur, you are one, or you aren't. That's
sure,
my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
But people wanting to start their own businesses or get into technology, I think you're right. Like a lot of that feeling around wanting to work for yourself has changed. It's no longer necessarily just going to work for a large company and being there for 20 years.
Right.
Like at a Coca-Cola or something. So.
Right. And I think that we've culturally begun to accept too this idea that maybe it's not great to work for only one place for your whole life. Maybe you're a more well-rounded individual and frankly, even a better employee by having had other experiences to lean on, to go to a new company and say, I know it's my first day here, but I've learned a lot from the place that I just came from. I just think that we're more accepting culturally now of this instability being okay. That not only is it okay, maybe it's good. Maybe shaking things up every now and again for yourself and for the people around you is incredibly beneficial. And like you said, for entrepreneurs, if you are an entrepreneur or you have that entrepreneurial spirit, you have to get really comfortable almost instantly with this idea of ever changing, ever altering. And I love that. Honestly, I think that the real reason I chose to do what I do for a living was I love to cook, but really I love the spirit of creating something that doesn't currently exist. And that is the mindset of an entrepreneur. Absolutely. Solving a problem, finding a need. You solved a problem that you thought you were experiencing. It was the quality of pork that you were getting. And so you started a farm, right? Yeah, what we did was. How do you even have that thought process, like, okay, I'm not getting what I want, I'm just going to do it myself? I feel like if you asked my mother that, she'd be like, that sounds like what Kevin's done his whole life. Like, when he didn't get his way, he just created something else. No, the reality of it is this. I think this is something that comes naturally to chefs. because my job, every day for years was someone would tell me they wanted something and I would have to make that happen immediately, basically. That's the process of working in a restaurant. Someone says, I want this, and we have to make it happen. And they come at you in a really kind of, how do I say this? You never know when they're going to come or in what form they're going to come. And the request, getting accustomed to making decisions in the moment very quickly, but very purposefully, is something that has helped me a lot as the years have gone on. And so when it came to things like not having a supply of the product that I wanted to use in my restaurant, or not having systems in place in order to do something that I thought was important, rather than waiting around for them to be developed, I've been able to convince my teammates to be willing to take the risk and to try something brand new. And a lot of the time, frankly, the way we end up on these things is that we say we're going to do it, and then we hang up the phone and we look at each other and we're like, well, I guess we got to do that now. And so it's a certain amount of kind of, I have a tendency to get us all in a little bit of trouble by being like, how hard could it be? And then it turns out really hard, but we don't back down nevertheless.
Good to know what you don't know, right?
yeah. It's a mix of, like a perfect balance of being incredibly stubborn and being, incredibly optimistic, that has a tendency to make, when those two things can live side by side, frankly, a lot of really great things can actually take place.
Absolutely. So you talked about being optimistic and positive. You've definitely had your fair share of challenges. And so I'll let you talk about those, but how do you remain positive and optimistic when you get a pretty, I would say, major setback?
Yeah. I've had more than my fair share of illness, unfortunately. It's just the card that I drew in life is one that my body has not cooperated entirely with me, in a lot of respects. It's just sort of certain areas of me have given up probably long before they should have. I'm kind of like, I like to think of myself as like that really cool British made car that's like really interesting and unique, but it's also kind of a piece of junk. Like that's basically what I'm working with here.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately I have gotten sick. I went through a bout of kidney cancer that I had to deal with. I've dealt with spinal surgery and a number of things that kind of just, they can really take it out of you, not just physically, but mentally. And I think the mental part is where most people, when faced with adversity, where they tend to crack and crumble first. And to be very honest with you, I think the key to optimism is understanding that negativity goes along with optimism, and you just need to let it pass through. Like the way I like to think of it is that the negativity in your life is sort of like the cars on the interstate. Like they just keep driving. You don't have to chase every one of them. Like just let them drive by. It's okay. And so what goes along with these setbacks is recognizing that you'll have days when you just don't feel like fighting it. And if you can just let that emotion move through you, you'll come out on the other side with actually a tremendous amount of perspective. And I think that optimism is always framed around the sense of something else, which is gratitude, learning to appreciate even your failures and your mistakes and your setbacks, So for me, for example, getting sick and having to go through a lot of surgeries and spend a lot of time at home, really ill, really miserable, that all sounds negative. But the reality of it is that before that, I had a really bad problem in my career, in that I was really unwilling to allow the people who worked for me to do the job that I was asking them to do. I felt too much need to involve myself in every single decision, to put my hands on everything. And I thought I was doing it to help them, or at least that's what I told myself, that I was trying to be helpful and supportive. In truth, I was really preventing them from shining and from them doing what I knew that they could excel at. Getting sick forced me to have to trust people. It forced me to recognize that that sometimes to be the most successful, you have to be willing to allow other people around you to be even more successful than you. And so I like to think that in every setback, if I'm willing to open my eyes wide enough, I can recognize something really positive out of it. That's how I feel about what we've gone through right now in this coronavirus COVID-19 world, you could be really upset. But I think I found personally a number of silver linings that I'm really excited about. And I think maybe that's just easier for me to say because I have gone through I've actually had to sort of stand there at the precipice of the world and ask myself whether the journey was over. And when you have had to do that, I find that it's a lot easier for you to see the good parts of life because you can truly lend context to what is actually worth being upset about.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Along with being grateful and positive, you're also one of the most authentic people I know. I mean, that comes through even on a show like Top Chef, where you're on TV and you're battling it out. You still really stay true to who you are. What is the role of authenticity? How has it played out in your life? Why has it become so important to you? How did you really hone that and learn that? I think it can be a skill,
Sure.
But why is that so important to you?
Well, it's interesting because I think that authenticity, how do I say this? I think that you are who you are. You are who you were born to be or who you've learned to be. I think that the problem with authenticity is that to be comfortable with being yourself, you have to let go of this sort of embedded fear that we all have of the judgment or the backlash that we're going to get from generally some completely unknown and oftentimes fabricated source. So for example, it takes a concerted effort. You have to learn to be willing to be vulnerable, to expose yourself because it's right or because it leads to greater things. It takes practice. And it's not something you should expect to be perfect at overnight. But my feeling is that, and this may sound like some sort of weird juju, but I'm of the opinion that until you can learn to be authentically yourself, you really can't ever get past the box that you've chosen to put yourself in. And so until you're willing to really be who you want to be and live by the standards that are personally important to you, you have in fact framed yourself in. You've limited yourself to a certain amount of space. And so you may get frustrated and say, my career is stalling out, or you may get frustrated and say, my relationships are stalling out. And I would turn that around and say to you that maybe you haven't gotten out of your own way, that because you are unwilling to be real and honest with yourself and then real and honest with the world and accept the fact that what goes along with that will be somebody won't like who that is. Somebody will have a problem with who you are, the way you look, the way you talk, the way you think. But you have to be willing to accept that that's okay. And that really in no way impacts who you are. Their feelings towards you, negative at least, they don't change you. They don't actually even have the capacity to hurt you unless you want them to. And so I think that when you learn to truly be authentic, it's an incredibly empowering experience. It allows you finally, as silly as it sounds, to live your actual life, not to live the life that somebody else wanted for you or that you think is acceptable.
That actually leads us perfectly into our first student question.
Okay, awesome.
So Michelle wants to know, what is the best way to handle rejection in the work field, and how do you motivate yourself to keep putting yourself out there?
Well, it's an amazing question. So I would say that first of all, the first thing you need to know about it is that rejection has never and will never feel good. I know that sounds so obvious, right. But I don't want you to think that because I have an ability to stay positive, that it doesn't hurt me to be rejected. It does. It hurts me as much as it hurts you or anyone else. The difference in the way that you really deal with it professionally is that you recognize that there's some reason why you were rejected. Sometimes it's incredibly unfair. It may be that you were judged poorly or that you were rejected for something that has nothing to do with you, that has only to do with other people's prejudices. And you know what? In those moments, the silver lining there is that you learn a little bit more about being yourself and about just the reality that the world isn't always an accepting place, but that shouldn't stop you. Because if the tables were turned, you would not want to be that person rejecting someone else for those same grounds. And so take that and let it energize you. In another scenario, perhaps your rejection came because your skill set isn't there. Perhaps it came because your education isn't quite where it needs to be. Well, rather than letting that get you down, like consider that to be the person who gave this news to you, who maybe hurt your feelings, has in fact made an investment in you. It's a silent one. It's a passive one. They're not going to help, but they've invested in your future because they've provided you with the capital that you needed to do what has to happen to make you better. So they've put a little bit of fuel in your tank because you know, and I know that the next time around, I don't want a person to be able to say that about me. So I'm going to do what I have to do to get better. I'm going to do what I have to do to get stronger and tougher, to get smarter. Maybe it's just to become more patient. Maybe it's to become more accepting. Whatever it may be, a lot of the time we need that extra little bit of push out the door. And the push sometimes comes in the form of rejection.
Yeah, so that's a great perspective. So look at rejection as fuel in the tank and as someone investing in you. At least they took the time to make a comment. It may not always be constructive, but you can find something in there that can really help you on your journey.
Right. And especially if you look at negative, hurtful comments that aren't constructive, what you take from them is that you don't want to make those same mistakes with someone else later. When it's your turn to give feedback, make it constructive, make it positive, make it impactful.
Right. Okay. So Jason would like to know how you think you have changed since you were a chef at Wood Fire Grill.
Oh man, a lot. So first of all, when I first became the chef of Wood Fire Grill, I was 24 years old, and I was pretty sure I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I certainly had a much, much bigger ego back then. I hadn't had to eat my fair share and several other people's fair share of humble pie. And so I think that my sense of self-worth was a little inflated, to be honest with you. It's important to have confidence, but it's not important and it's not helpful for that confidence to be used to berate or downplay the contributions of other people. And so I'd like to think that the first thing I've done is that I've grown up and learned to accept the fact that around me every day are people who are frankly more talented than I am, and I should appreciate that, not be put off by it. I think the next one is that as time has gone on, as a chef, I have also learned better to be a leader. In the early days of my career, I was very consumed with cooking for me, creating for me. How am I getting better? And nowadays, I think more often than not, I'm asking myself, am I doing what needs to happen for my team members to get better? Am I doing what they need to be able to excel? And I think that additional sort of life lesson and crash course in leadership has made me inevitably a better cook too, because it has allowed me to recognize what's important and what's not important.
Mm-hmm. So Stacy would like to know, at what point in your career did you feel like you had made it? She is experiencing some imposter syndrome, especially through grad school, and would love your thoughts.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I don't know that I have. There any given day that I'm like, not yet, maybe soon. No, honestly, I think you have to see it as a series of successes. To use the old analogy of like climbing a mountain. People think that a mountain just goes straight up, that it's shaped like a pyramid, but that's not true. Mountains tend to go up and then level off and then maybe even go down before they go back up. And that's really what a career actually looks like. And so that making it is really a series of cresting those hills that inevitably probably lead to, another hill. And so like one of them, for example, for me, came right after the first time of doing Top Chef. And I came home and I was back in my restaurant and I was creating menus that felt truly different than what I had been making when I left for Top Chef. And I recognized in that moment, I finally learned to have an independent voice culinarily, creatively speaking. As an artist, if you will, I'm sort of finally doing something that's uniquely Kevin. And so I felt in that moment like I had made it for that little piece. That's one. I think another one was when I opened my first business alone, and I was terrified, as well you should be. And it finally was open and it was garnering awards, but more importantly, it was employing people and it was making a contribution to my community. And I felt like, okay, you know what? You said so many years ago that you wanted to make a difference. Well, maybe now you're starting to do that. One of the most recent ones, frankly, has been very, very recent. And it's been when I've learned to be very open about my struggles physically and mentally, when I've talked about the sicknesses that I've battled, and then the mental instability that goes alongside that constant sort of state of illness. And I've had people since then reach out to me and tell me that my being honest and being just being real about it and being willing to accept openly my struggles have helped them to finally find their way out of a dark place, or to find the hope that they needed to keep fighting. And in that, I felt very much like I had made it, because for me, in those moments, I recognized that I actually did something that was genuinely worthwhile. I've made a lot of really delicious food over the last 20 years, but they all pale in comparison to really helping somebody when they're in that place of vulnerability.
Very nice. So, you talk about your cooking and food. One of the things you've said about food, I'm going to read this. Cooking is figuring out the great qualities of any food and making those qualities shine. So how does this apply to our students and their life post-school, or in career, or even going on from high school to college? Like, how do they apply that?
Well, so it applies in a lot of different ways. The first is, let's just imagine that each of you out there are having to sort of take an internal inventory of yourself. And using that same analogy that I used, I think the first thing you do here is that you recognize what you're great at, what are your traits that are truly admirable about you or that you excel at, and you find a way to put those first and foremost in front all the time. I learned a long time ago that, like, you can keep trying to get better at the thing that you're terrible at, or you can really try to frame your life around doing the things that you excel at. That doesn't mean you should give up on trying to get better at things you aren't very good at. There's plenty of things that I'm really bad at that I like to try to improve on. But nevertheless, I think that that real success for me has been found once I put myself in a position where my real honest strengths could shine through. And so I would say, first of all, you have to take stock of yourself. You got to be really honest with you, and and decide realistically what it is that you're great at. So that's the first part. The second, and this really is the second piece to that analogy, is once you decide what's great about an ingredient, and then you focus all of your energy on making that thing shine, the other piece is that you get out of the way of that doing well. You get out of the way of that thing shining. So as a cook, for example, if you just let's take a fresh tomato in season, and you think, okay, well, it's got nice acidity, and it's naturally kind of savory, and it's juicy, and it's crisp. And so I don't need to do a lot to make a really great tomato great. Maybe I put a little salt on it because it needs a little salinity. But otherwise, I kind of just leave it alone, and I don't dump something on top of it that would destroy what's naturally great about it. And so to take that analogy to yourself, your life moving forward, your career, is that if you've decided that, an attribute of yourself, if you say, you know what, I am naturally a really great self-starting individual. I always have had the ability to just kind of get after things and knock them out. Well, don't put yourself in a position in your career where you're no longer allowed the freedom to move at that pace, because you'll be so infinitely frustrated if you find yourself in a role where you have to wait to be told to start or do or work or look at anything. You'll find that that thing that you were naturally great at, now it becomes your enemy. And so it's standing in the way of that greatness. And so that's really the second piece to this, is that you have to recognize that what goes along with what is sort of naturally something that you should emphasize about you, we all have, every coin has two sides. The other side of that coin are the things that pair with that and that will prevent that greatness from coming through. And so that conversation is something that you'll have to have your whole life. And it will be different, by the way. It will change as you change and you grow and your life changes. But that's the key, is that you have to constantly measure what you need to be great and what you need to go away to be great.
Great. I've never heard career advice akin to a tomato. That is pretty awesome. You heard it here, folks. Okay, so we've got so many questions coming in. I don't even know how to pick one. Okay, Nathan wants to know what the hardest thing about Top Chef is. I feel like we should ask a Top Chef question.
No, it's great. Flat out, the hardest thing about Top Chef is the filming schedule. So what most people don't realize is that to film a season of Top Chef takes about 8 to 9 weeks. And you are sequestered for the entire 8 to 9 weeks. So imagine you're a juror. You can't talk to your family or your friends. They won't allow you to read books. You can't watch television. You can't send emails. You can't write letters. You're not even allowed calendars or clocks in the house. You film, generally most days you film 20 hours a day. You film this show 7 days a week for the entirety of that run. And so really the most difficult thing about Top Chef is not breaking down mentally. You're going to be tired. Everyone is exhausted, and you can see it. If you're watching the show now, you can pay attention and you'll see exactly what I mean. People are physically exhausted, just in the cadence of the way that they talk on camera, for example.
Right.
But by far the most challenging thing isn't actually the cooking challenges. It's the mental fatigue and disorientation that kind of goes into it, because everybody on Top Chef is accustomed to being a decision maker and a leader. And when you agree to do Top Chef, believe it or not, you don't get to decide on anything. You don't even get to decide when you go to the bathroom. So it's a very challenging world to kind of throw yourself into.
So that seems like there's a lot of parallels to life where you're always exhausted. Running your own business is hard, especially a restaurant. Restaurant is a full-time business for sure, in all senses of the word.
And in a lot of times, because of that fatigue, mental fatigue or physical, even simple decisions become impossibly difficult. So, if I had to give a piece of career advice to everybody who's listening to this, and it might not be necessary today or tomorrow, it might take 10 or 15 years before this advice is really relevant to you. But what I would tell you is that you should never downplay the significance of being so fatigued mentally that simple decisions are really hard. It's going to happen at some point in your career. You're going to want to know why you just can't make the choice, why you just can't seem to figure out what the next step is. It happens to all of us. It's just the reality of it. And I think that people take for granted, especially in my career field. And frankly, if any of you end up going in a career field where there's a lot of physical work that goes into it every day, you take for granted how much more difficult in many respects the mental work of it can be, and that it drains you very, very quickly. So I say that just to remember that when you start feeling that way, 1, don't give up on yourself. 2, you're not alone. It's happened to everyone. And then 3, that reinvestment in you is going to be really important. And so don't wait to get run over by that train, as it were, to know what you're going to do. So, that in a perfect world, you learn enough about yourself, you have enough honest conversations with yourself that you can see those moments kind of coming in life.
Right. And what I've learned is sleep. Don't think that it's no badge of honor to say you got 2 hours of sleep last night. Get some sleep. It helps so much.
I'm really, really bad at sleeping, and I have my whole life. I'm just like one of those stupid people who is like, of all the things that you could be bad at, I'm not good at sleep and haven't since my childhood. But I will admit that now more than ever in my life, despite the fact that I'm actually busier now than I probably have ever been, I sleep more than I ever have as well.
You need to recharge, and that's when your brain does it. So it's super important. Okay, we're running out of time with Kevin, but I'll ask one more question from our students. Sarah would like to know, who is one of your role models and why?
Ooh, that's a really great question. Gosh, I have a lot. I look to perhaps maybe non-traditional people as role models a lot of the time. I think a lot of folks, they try to find a mentor in their industry, and I think that's very important. I certainly have some chefs like Michel Bras from Lille in France, is someone who I consider to be very who I've taken a lot of direction from in my life, somebody that I'm inspired by. But sometimes I like to look at outside resources. There's a person named Jocko Willenick, who was the commander of SEAL Team 3. It's a weird sort of thing. He has written a lot of books on leadership. And although I feel like he and I have nothing in common, basically, and I'm just like a slob to this guy. I look at him as a role model for what real discipline looks like, understanding that if you want to be tough, then you have to get tough. You have to practice being tough, and that you are the biggest enemy you have in that respect, that you have to work around. It's easy for us to give up on ourselves. Like, it's one of those that, generally people give up effort on something they're working on, or whether it be exercise or something difficult, a life decision, way before they've reached their capacity. Like, they just give up because it's hard. And so, someone like him, and hearing his words, and then recognizing that he had to do that because it was literally a life and death scenario. He had people's lives at stake. And so he couldn't afford to just give up when things were hard. I think that's incredibly inspirational. I look at people who have had, a difficult path to success. Some people who aren't even here. Another chef that I admire is a woman named Edna Lewis, an African-American cook who has passed away a number of years ago, but who, in my opinion, still she wrote a book called A Taste of Country Cooking that I think is still maybe the most accurate viewpoint on seasonal food that has ever been written, including brand new books where people think they're so enlightened. Well, she was saying this 70 years ago, and she really truly understood it. And I think, those kinds of things are looking up to people and the strengths that they've put in front of them, the things that they've been able to accomplish, are pretty incredible. I'm a sucker for kind of looking to our founding fathers and people like that and asking, why did they make the decisions that they did? Point to this is that rather than just sort of modeling myself after one person and saying, I wish I could be more like so-and-so, I try to look at people, everyday people, my contemporaries, my coworkers, sometimes, the people who technically I am in charge of, and ask myself what they do or what traits they have that I admire, that I wish I could improve in myself. I find that it's more realistic, and frankly, it's more empowering when you learn to be inspired by those around you than just perhaps people who you will never have an opportunity to meet in your life.
Sure, because you can turn them into mentors.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that people sometimes forget. They think a mentor has to be someone who has done everything and seen everything in life before they can mentor you, but that's not true. Like, mentorship can be a joint operation. You can mentor someone who is mentoring you back. Like, it's about life experience. And we downplay too often what other people have to bring to the table. When you talk about diversity, for example, in the workplace, and people all the time get way too hung up on the idea that diversity is just that it's gender, it's sex, it's race, it's skin color. And I would argue that more often than not, it's more important to have a diversity of ideas than anything else. People who come from very different backgrounds, they could all look identical and have completely different life experiences. And we downplay the significance of that a lot of the time. And so I think that learning to be inspired by as many people that you come into contact with in life as possible gives you an opportunity to have a lot more mentors in life. And I think that that's probably, in the long run, more valuable than nearly anything.
Totally agree. One last thing, Lane Lelly is tuned in and is shouting out to both of us. So hi, Lane, go class of 2013. Best class ever, right?
Right, yeah, always the best class ever, 2013.
Yeah. Lead Atlanta, best class ever. Okay, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I wish we had like 2 more hours with you. There are so many questions, and I have questions, but this has been so valuable. You have been amazing, and we just really appreciate the words you have to share with our graduates.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for giving me the time to chat with you. Real honor for me, honestly. I hope to get to do it again sometime soon. And I hope that I said something today that in the end maybe can help you. You know, I think that's the goal, is just remembering that we all have a responsibility to one another, everybody in life, that we're here to lift each other up, not to put each other down. And so just keep that in mind. Remember that when you're living your life, when you're moving forward into whatever the next step for you is, that empowering people and enlivening people is more important than anything.
Absolutely. I just want to tell the graduates coming up that coming up we have some really great speakers, just as great as Kevin. Mayor Kasim Reed, who is the most recent past mayor of Atlanta, he's going to be joining us. We've got Ambassador Andrew Young, who's like a civil rights legend, past U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, just an amazing individual. So we have some great people lined up to chat with you over the next couple of weeks. Tune in, search SuperNova South or SuperNova Commencements everywhere on the web. You will find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. These videos are also posted for you to reference. Kevin, thank you again so much. And graduates, congratulations. We're excited to know what you're doing and where you land. So leave us a comment. And remember, it's a blessing to be a blessing. So see you all next week.
Bye, guys. Congratulations.
Bye.